The night I sent that text to my family telling them to remove my name from every single loan, my phone lit up like I just triggered another IED. The screen wouldn't stop flashing. Messages poured in one after another, exploding across the notification bar in rapid succession. But here's the thing that cut deeper than any shrapnel ever could. Not one of them asked if I could still feel my legs. Not one person typed out the words, "Are you okay?" Instead, every message, every frantic call, every voicemail dripping with panic had the same underlying question. Could I still sign my name? They saw the wheelchair in that photo I sent and thought it made me weaker. They thought I'd come crawling back, desperate and broken. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that I'd come home trained to fight wars most people never even see coming, especially the war brewing inside my own house. My name is Kinsley Graham. I'm 32 years old. Until 3 months ago, I was a ghost for the United States government. I operated in shadows where the desert sand turns to glass under the heat, and the air smells like burning diesel and sweat and fear. Now I'm just a tenant. Room 304 at the Riverside Veteran Recovery Center. The place smells like industrial bleach mixed with cheap lemon floor wax, a combination that tries way too hard to cover up the real smells underneath. Despair, stale cafeteria coffee, the faint metallic scent of wheelchairs and walkers lined up in the hallways like soldiers waiting for orders that will never come. It's 2 in the morning. The hallway outside my door sits quiet except for the rhythmic squeak of a nurse making her rounds in rubber-soled shoes. Inside my room, though, silence is getting murdered by a buzzing that vibrates through the metal frame of my bed. It rattles my teeth, makes my skull ache. It's my phone. That small black rectangle sitting on the bedside table has suddenly become the most dangerous object in this room. More dangerous than any improvised explosive device I ever encountered overseas. The screen lights up the darkness in violent strobing flashes. Blue-white light illuminates the chrome rims of my wheelchair parked next to the bed. That chair is a sleek titanium beast, lightweight, expensive, state-of-the-art. But in the harsh glow of all these notifications, it looks like a cage. The metal reflects the light back at me like an unblinking eye, constantly reminding me that my body has been reclassified. I'm no longer an asset in the field. I'm inventory with damage, a piece of equipment that got blown up and can't be fully repaired. The phone buzzes again, and again, and again. It's the family group chat. For 7 long months while I was deployed on a classified rotation with the Maritime Strategic Response Group, this chat was a graveyard. Total silence. No messages asking if I was safe. No photos of Sunday dinners I was missing. No updates about the neighbors or the weather or anything that would make me feel like I still had a place in their world. Just digital silence. A black void where a family should be. But tonight that silence has been shattered and replaced by panic so loud, I can practically hear their voices screaming through the glass screen. The notifications pile up like sandbags before a flood. 17 missed calls, 42 text messages. They're coming from my father, my mother, my younger brother Logan, even 2 cousins who usually only remember I exist when they need someone to co-sign for a used car or lend them money for rent. Hovering above this chaotic stream of demands is the grenade I threw into their living room exactly 4 hours ago. I typed it out with thumbs that still have calluses from gripping a carbine for hours on end in the desert heat. Even though the rest of me is broken, those hands still work just fine. I wrote it simple and direct. Remove my name from every family loan, effective today. That was it. No explanations, no apologies, no softening the blow with emojis or promises to talk later. Just a direct order, the kind I was trained to give when hesitation meant body bags and missed opportunities. I lie here in the dark, staring at the ceiling tiles. I count the perforations in the row directly above my head. 112 tiny holes punched into cheap acoustic foam. I've counted them so many times I could draw a map from memory. My arms are crossed over my chest. They feel heavy, dense with new muscle I've built over the last few weeks of aggressive physical therapy. My triceps are rock hard. swollen from lifting my own dead weight in and out of chairs, in and out of showers, in and out of a life I used to recognize. My shoulders ache constantly now from compensating for everything my legs used to do. But my legs? My legs are quiet. I look down the length of the thin hospital sheet covering my body. I can see the shape of them, the contours of my knees, the outline of my feet, but there's no signal. It's like looking at a photograph of someone else's body. There's no hum of electricity running through the nerves, no twitch of a muscle needing to stretch, no ache from sitting too long in one position. Just silence. A heavy concrete silence that stops right at my lumbar spine like someone drew a line across my body and erased everything below it. It's a strange thing to look at a part of yourself and feel absolutely nothing. Like that part of you has already died and been buried, but the rest of you is forced to drag the tombstone around everywhere you go. The phone vibrates so hard it dances a half inch to the left on the table. I turn my head, let my eyes focus on the preview bubbles popping up on the lock screen one after another. My father is at the top of the list. Robert Graham, the man who taught me that a Graham never cries but always pays their dues. His message isn't a greeting. It's not a prayer for my recovery or a question about my health. It's an audit. How much do you still have in savings? Below him, my mother, Dana Graham, the woman who used to tell the neighbors her daughter was traveling for work because admitting I was in special operations made her nervous. Not for my safety, mind you. For what the church ladies would think of a woman carrying a gun and kicking down doors in foreign countries. Her message is shorter, sharper, like a knife between the ribs. Your benefits are still coming in, right? Then there's Logan, my little brother. The golden boy who never had to leave Maple Ridge because leaving is hard and staying where mom does your laundry and dad makes excuses for you is easy. He's 30 years old, but his text reads like it came from a teenager who just realized his allowance got cut off. Don't be a jerk, Kinsley. Don't ruin the family credit score just because you're having a bad day. A bad day. I let out a breath that sounds suspiciously like a laugh, even though there's no humor in it. None at all. A bad day is when it rains during a training exercise and your gear gets soaked. A bad day is when the chow hall runs out of coffee and you have to function on 3 hours of sleep. Getting your spine rearranged by a roadside bomb in a province most Americans couldn't find on a map isn't a bad day. It's a life sentence. I scan the rest of the messages. They're all variations on the same frantic theme. Interest rates, mortgage payments, co-signed leases for cars I've never seen, an agricultural LLC that I supposedly own but have never laid eyes on. Not a single person has asked the questions you'd expect from a family who just found out their daughter was medevaced halfway across the world with life-altering injuries. No one asks, "Are you okay?" No one asks, "Are you in pain?" No one asks, "Will you walk again?" No one even asks, "How bad is the injury?" The omission is so glaring it feels like a physical blow. It hurts worse than the phantom burning I sometimes feel in toes that no longer respond to my brain's commands. They're panicking, yes, but they're not panicked because I might be broken. They're panicked because their ATM stopped dispensing cash. I'm not a daughter to them right now. I'm a failed investment, a resource that's suddenly become finite and unreliable. My hand twitches toward the phone. It's pure muscle memory. The old Kinsley, the one who grew up in a little town in Indiana trying to be the good daughter, would have picked up on the first ring. She would have apologized for worrying them. She would have logged into her banking app and transferred $500 to mom's account just to calm everyone down. She would have promised to sort out the paperwork for the bank first thing in the morning. She would have swallowed her own blood to keep them fed. But that old Kinsley died in a flash of white light and red dust 3,000 miles away. I pull my hand back, tuck it under the pillow. I decide to let the phone ring, let it buzz itself into oblivion. This is my first real exercise in rehabilitation. And it has nothing to do with parallel bars or grip strength or learning how to transfer from bed to chair without falling. This is an exercise in will. I'm testing myself. Can I lie here in the dark while the people I share DNA with spiral into chaos and simply do nothing? Can I watch the house catch fire and not rush in with a bucket of water when I'm the one who struck the match? The vibration is annoying, like a fly that won't die no matter how many times you swat at it. But I force myself to breathe through it. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4. Tactical breathing. It keeps your heart rate down when bullets are flying. It keeps your mind clear when everything around you is chaos. It keeps the rage from boiling over into tears. I close my eyes. But the darkness behind my eyelids isn't empty. It's filled with faces. The faces of the men and women I served with. I see Miller, who pulled me out of the wreckage while his own arm was hanging by a thread of muscle and torn fabric. I see Captain Velas, who sat by my bedside in Germany for 18 hours straight, refusing to leave until I woke up just so I'd see a friendly face first thing. That was family. That was blood spilled and shared and earned. This, the buzzing phone and the frantic messages and the complete lack of concern for my actual well-being, this is just a transaction. If you're wondering how a daughter gets to the point where she cuts off her own bloodline from her bank account, how she lies in a hospital bed listening to her parents beg for money while she can't even feel her own legs, we have to go back. We have to rewind the tape. I need to show you how the foundation was laid long before the bomb ever went off. I open my eyes and look past the useless lumps under the blanket toward the window. Outside, the night is heavy and black, but the security lights from the parking lot illuminate the flagpole near the entrance of the center. The flag is there, waving sluggishly in the humid night breeze. It's a symbol of a country that, for all its flaws, sent a plane to get me when I was broken. It sent doctors to stitch me back together. It sends checks every month to keep me alive. A grateful nation, they call it. Then the phone lights up again. Another text from Dad. We have a payment due on the 15th. You need to call the bank. The contrast is sharp enough to cut skin. Outside, a nation that knows I gave everything. Inside, a phone that says I haven't given enough. I promised myself I wouldn't cry in this place. I already shed enough tears in the sand. I'm not telling you this story so you'll feel sorry for the girl in the wheelchair. Pity is a currency I don't accept. It has no value here. I'm telling you this because you need to understand the architecture of a betrayal. You need to understand that the bomb didn't just go off in Afghanistan. The fuse was lit in a kitchen in Indiana 20 years ago. I need to explain why this time. I'm not coming home with a checkbook and a smile. I'm choosing a different weapon. I'm choosing the law. I'm choosing silence. I'm choosing to let them drown in the debts they forged in my name. I watch the phone buzz one last time before the screen finally goes dark, exhausted by its own efforts. The room returns to shadow. The silence rushes back in, heavy and thick like a weighted blanket. I lay my hand on the metal rim of the wheelchair beside me. It's cold, hard, unyielding, just like I have to be. They're probably sitting around the kitchen table right now wondering what happened to me. They're probably telling themselves that the injury made me confused or bitter or scared. They're writing the narrative that suits them, the one where I'm the victim and they're the worried saints just trying to help their poor broken daughter. They thought I'd roll back into their lives as the same obedient girl who left. But Afghanistan didn't just take my legs. It burned away my obedience. It stripped away my need for their approval. It showed me what real loyalty looks like. And this isn't it. To understand why I'm currently lying in a hospital bed in Riverside, refusing to answer the phone while my father hyperventilates about a bank loan, you have to understand the soil I grew up in. I was raised in Maple Ridge, Indiana, a town that's less of a community and more of an inescapable gravitational pull. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your license plate number and exactly how much you owe on your truck, where gossip travels faster than the internet and your business is everyone's entertainment. It's a flat, endless grid of cornfields and single-story houses all centered around the Redline Foods corn processing plant. That factory was the beating heart of the town. It was also the chain around my father's neck. My father spent 30 years at Redline Foods. He came home every single day smelling like sweet corn syrup and industrial grease. It was a smell that permeated everything in our house. The curtains, the carpet, even the food we ate tasted faintly of it. It was the smell of minimum wage survival. He'd walk through the door, slump into his recliner, and turn on the television. Too exhausted to speak, but never too exhausted to remind us how hard he worked to keep a roof over our heads, how much he sacrificed, how ungrateful we'd be if we ever forgot it. My mother was the bookkeeper. Not professionally, though she did handle the registers part-time at the local grocery store. But her real job was managing the ledger of the Graham family's existence. She was obsessed with bills. She treated the mailman like a harbinger of doom. Every envelope that arrived was opened with a surgical precision and a grimace. But more than the bills, she was obsessed with the Graham family credit score. To her, that three-digit number wasn't just a financial metric. It was a measure of our soul. It was our honor, our standing in the community. If the score dropped, it was a moral failing. If we were late on a payment, it was a sin against God and the neighbors. She talked about that number the way other people talk about their children's report cards. Then there was Logan. My brother is 2 years younger than me, but in our house he was treated like the heir to a throne that didn't exist. Logan was charming in a lazy, devastating kind of way. He had a smile that could get him out of a speeding ticket, and an inability to hold down a job that was truly pathological. He'd get hired at a landscaping crew on Monday and quit by Thursday because his back hurt, or the boss was mean, or the sun was too bright. Pick any excuse. He used them all. My parents never scolded him. When I brought home straight A's, they nodded and asked why I hadn't picked up an extra shift at the diner to help with bills. When Logan quit his job because he overslept 3 days in a row, they sighed and said, "He'll figure it out. One day he'll find his passion." I was the only one who looked at the cornfields of Maple Ridge and saw a cage. I was the only one who looked at the flat horizon and wanted to know what was on the other side of it. What the world looked like beyond the grain silos and the gas station, and the same faces I'd been seeing my entire life. I was 12 years old when I first told my father I wanted to do something important with my life. I wanted to build things, or fix things, or fight for things. I mentioned the military. My father laughed. It was a wet hacking sound from too many years of cigarettes and factory dust. He looked at me over the top of his beer can and said, "That's not a job for a girl, Kinsley. Your job is to stay close. You marry decent. You help the family. You don't run off playing soldier." That was the seed. Stay close. Help the family. It was planted deep in my brain before I even knew what a mortgage was or what it meant to be a cosigner. They taught me that my existence was a support beam for the structure of their lives. I wasn't an individual with dreams and goals. I was insurance, a safety net, a backup plan. As I got older, the house became a pressure cooker. I was working 2 jobs while finishing high school, one at the library shelving books and one waitressing at the truck stop off the interstate where truckers left greasy tips and even greasier comments. Every Friday, I put my tips on the kitchen table. My mother would count the crumpled bills with quick, greedy fingers, her eyes darting to the stack of unpaid notices on the counter. She never said thank you. She just said, "This'll cover the electric." Good. But I had a secret. I wasn't just working, I was training. I ran 5 miles every morning before the sun came up, pounding the asphalt of the county roads while the rest of Maple Ridge slept off their hangovers. I did push-ups in the back of the library stacks between shifts. I studied mechanics and engineering manuals I borrowed from the reference section. I was preparing for something they couldn't see coming. The war started in the kitchen during my senior year. I'd requested information packets from several military recruitment offices. I knew they'd been mailed. I'd tracked the dates online, but they never arrived. For 3 weeks, I checked the mailbox every single day, and every day it was empty. Then one afternoon, I came home early from school because of a canceled assembly. I found my mother in the backyard standing over the burning trash barrel. She was holding a thick, creamy envelope with a Department of Defense logo in the corner. The edges were already curling black from the flames. I screamed. I didn't mean to, but the sound ripped out of my throat like it had a life of its own. I ran to her and snatched the half-burned papers from the fire. It was my acceptance packet, my ticket out, the thing I'd been working toward for years. She didn't even look guilty. She looked self-righteous. She wiped the ash from her hands onto her jeans and said, "We're protecting you, Kinsley. You don't know what's out there. You belong here. Besides, who's going to help us pay for the new roof if you're running around in the mud somewhere? That was the moment the glass broke. The moment I realized they didn't want me to stay because they loved me. They wanted me to stay because they needed my labor, my income, my name on documents. I spent the next 6 months in a cold war with my own parents. I reapplied to everything. I forged the necessary parental consent signatures where I could. Where I couldn't, I waited. Counted down the days until I turned 18, and they couldn't legally stop me anymore. When the final acceptance letter came for the Maritime Strategic Response Group selection program, a pipeline so grueling that most men washed out in week 1, I hid it in the lining of my winter coat. I didn't tell a soul. The day I left, there was no party, no balloons. My father stood in the driveway watching me load my single duffel bag into a taxi I'd paid for with 3 months of saved tips. He didn't hug me. He didn't wish me luck. He leaned against the peeling siding of the house, crossed his arms, and delivered the curse that's rung in my ears for a decade. He said, "You'll crawl back. You'll crawl back when you realize nobody out there cares about you like we do. You think you're special, Kinsley. You're nothing without this family." I closed the taxi door, and I didn't look back. Not once. The training was brutal. It was designed to break human beings down to their raw components and rebuild them as weapons, as tools, as something useful and sharp. I spent days covered in mud, freezing in surf, carrying logs that weighed more than I did. I learned how to disassemble a rifle in the dark, how to navigate by the stars, how to survive on 2 hours of sleep and pure willpower. But the most important thing I learned, what a real family looks like. My squad mates were strangers from all over the country. There was a kid from the Bronx who'd never seen the ocean before training, a mechanic from Texas who could fix anything with duct tape and spite, a surfer from California who spoke 3 languages and never raised her voice. We had nothing in common except the mud and the mission. But when I sprained my ankle on a 12-mile ruck march, the Texan carried my pack for the last 3 miles so I wouldn't get dropped from the program. When I got sick with pneumonia during winter survival training, the girl from the Bronx slept by my bunk all night to make sure I kept breathing. They didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't keep a ledger of who owed what. They just did it because that's what you do when someone's struggling. That's what family is supposed to look like. Graduation day arrived 2 years later. It was a formal ceremony on a windy parade deck in Virginia. The families of the other graduates were there in droves. I saw fathers crying with pride, mothers holding up signs that said things like, "That's my daughter," and "We're so proud." Little brothers wearing oversized military hats trying to look tough. I scanned the bleachers until my eyes burned. I looked for the familiar slouch of my father, the nervous fidgeting of my mother. The section reserved for my family was empty, completely empty. I checked my phone during a break in the ceremony. There was one message from my mother. "Send money when you can. Things are tight here. The transmission on the van is acting up." I put the phone away, stood at attention, let the wind dry my eyes before anyone could see them water. That was the day I realized I was an orphan with living parents. Then came Afghanistan. For the next few years, my life became a series of deployments. I lived in shipping containers and tents. I ate dust for breakfast. I saw things that would make the residents of Maple Ridge vomit in terror and never sleep again. I lost hearing in my left ear from a firefight in the Korangal Valley. I lost friends whose names I still whisper when I can't sleep, faces I see when I close my eyes. But through it all, the digital umbilical cord to Indiana remained attached, and it was hungry. Every time I got paid, the request would start. It was never a demand. It was always a crisis, always an emergency that only I could solve. Dad hurt his back and can't pick up overtime. "Kinsley, we're 2 months behind on the mortgage." "Logan has a great opportunity to start a delivery business, but he needs a vehicle, just a used truck. He'll pay you back." "The furnace died. It's freezing here. You don't want us to freeze, do you?" I was making good money. Hazard pay, combat pay, re-enlistment bonuses, and I had nowhere to spend it. I was living on a base where food and lodging were free. So I sent it, I sent thousands, then tens of thousands. I bought the truck for Logan. He drove it for 3 months, then quit the delivery job because the hours interfered with his social life. He sold the truck and kept the cash. When I asked about it, Mom said he needed the money to get by. Kinsley, don't be selfish. I paid off the mortgage not once, but 3 separate times. I paid for a roof I didn't live under. I paid for dental work for my aunt. I paid for groceries I would never eat. Every time I hit the transfer button on my banking app, I told myself this was the last time. But then I'd hear my father's voice in my head. You'll crawl back. And I'd send more. Trying to prove him wrong. Trying to buy their respect. I thought if I just gave enough, if I solved enough problems, they'd finally look at me and say, "We're proud of you. You did good." But the praise never came. Only the receipts. I remember one specific night in Kandahar. It was winter, and the temperature had dropped to near freezing. We were huddled around a heater in the team room cleaning our gear after a 3-day patrol. My phone pinged. It was an email from my mother. No subject line, just a photo of a new leather sectional sofa in the living room back in Maple Ridge. Underneath, she'd written, "Look what we got on sale. It fits the room perfectly. Can you wire $2,000 to cover the rest? We put it on the store credit card and the interest is killing us." I looked at the photo. The sofa looked warm, comfortable. It looked like a home. Then I looked at my boots, caked in dried mud and someone else's blood. I looked at my hands, chapped and raw from the cold and the work. I turned to my team leader, a gruff sergeant named Miller. "Does your mom ask you for money?" I asked him. He laughed and shook his head. "No, Graham. My mom sends me cookies and tells me to keep my head down. She'd starve before she took a dime of my combat pay." That was when the crack in my chest started to widen, when I realized I wasn't a hero to them. I wasn't a soldier. I was a resource, an oil well they'd drilled into, and they were pumping me dry before the lease ran out. I kept thinking if I just gave a little more, they'd finally be proud. Turns out I was only teaching them how much they could take. They weren't saving the money I sent. They were expanding their lifestyle to match my income. They were living a middle-class fantasy funded by my special operations salary. And I was the one dodging bullets to pay for it. They promised over and over, "We'll pay you back when things settle, when Dad retires, when Logan's business takes off, when the settlement comes through." There was always a when. But when is a fairy tale word for people who don't want to face reality? There was no when. There was only, "Give me more." I sat there in the cold desert night staring at the picture of the sofa, and I transferred the money. I did it because I was weak, because I was still that 12-year-old girl terrified that her father was right, that I was nothing without them. I didn't know then that the real cost wouldn't be the money. The real cost would be my name. While I was out there fighting for strangers, they were back home signing my signature on documents that would bind me to their failures forever. I was financing the very trap that would try to crush me when I finally came home, broken, on wheels, and no longer useful. The morning my life ended and restarted began with a deceptive amount of beauty. It was a Tuesday in early October, and the Afghan sun was already baking the armor plating of our vehicle, turning the interior into a convection oven. We were on a routine supply escort mission rolling down a strip of hard-packed dirt that we'd traversed a dozen times before. The mountains in the distance were jagged and purple against a sky so blue, it looked like it had been painted by a child with a fresh set of crayons. I was in the passenger seat, my rifle resting against my knee. The vibrations of the engine hummed through the soles of my boots, a familiar, comforting rattle that usually lulled me into a state of hyper-aware focus. I turned to Miller, who was driving. He was wearing his wraparound sunglasses, chewing on a piece of gum with the rhythmic intensity of a metronome. I keyed my mic. "If we make it back to base before chow closes, I'm gonna FaceTime my mother. It's her birthday tomorrow." I told him I'd sent her $300 to buy a new stand mixer she'd been hinting about for 6 months. Miller laughed. "You're a good kid, Graham. Your mom's lucky to have a daughter who remembers things like mixers while dodging bullets." I smiled. I remember that smile perfectly because it was the last genuine expression I'd wear for a very long time. Then the world turned white. There was no sound at first. That's the thing the movies always get wrong. They give you a boom, a loud explosion. Reality gives you a vacuum. It felt like the atmosphere inside the truck had been sucked out instantly, replaced by a crushing, blinding pressure. The white light wasn't spiritual or peaceful. It was violent. It was the color of magnesium burning at 1,000 degrees. Then came the sensation of flight, but not the graceful kind. It was the feeling of being inside a tin can that a giant had just kicked across a parking lot. When the sound finally caught up to the light, it wasn't a noise. It was a physical blow. The sound of the sky shattering, of metal tearing, of the world ending in the space of a heartbeat. I landed hard. I don't know where or how, but I remember the smell: ozone, burning rubber, the copper tang of blood, and dust. So much dust it felt like I was breathing in the desert itself. My training took over before my brain could process the horror. It's a strange robotic survival mechanism they drill into you. My hands moved instantly. I checked my chest rig, checked my rifle, reached up to touch my helmet, verifying it was still strapped to my head. My upper body was a flurry of activity, adrenaline flooding my veins like ice water. I turned to check on Miller, but the smoke was too thick. I tried to push myself up, to scramble over the center console and drag him out of the wreckage. I planted my hands on the dashboard, pushed with everything I had. My arms straightened, my shoulders engaged, my core tightened. But nothing happened. I looked down. I expected to see my legs trapped under crushed metal, expected to see debris pinning me to the seat. But there was nothing holding me down. My legs were there, clad in the dusty camouflage pattern I'd worn for 8 months. They looked fine. They looked like my legs, but they were silent. It's the only way I can describe it. Usually your body has a hum. You can feel the tension in your thighs, the flex of an ankle, the pressure of your heel against the floor mat. But below my waist, the map of my body had been erased. It was as if someone had taken a pair of scissors and cut the connection cord between my brain and everything below my ribcage. I sent the command: move, get up, push. The signal went out and it vanished into a void. I screamed then. Not because of pain, though the pain was starting to bloom in my back like a red-hot flower opening its petals. I screamed because I knew with a terrifying, absolute certainty that the Kinsley Graham who'd climbed into that truck was gone. The next 48 hours were a blur. Helicopter rotors, shouting voices, the sterile, blinding lights of operating theaters. I was moved from a field hospital to Bagram, then to a transport plane that vibrated all the way to Germany, and finally across the Atlantic to the United States. I floated in and out of consciousness, riding waves of morphine that dulled the edges of the world but couldn't silence the voice in my head, the voice that kept whispering, "This is permanent. This is forever. Your life as you knew it is over." Doctors hovered over me, their faces masked, their voices low and serious. They used words like severe spinal trauma and burst fracture. They talked about the T12 vertebra as if it were a mechanical part that had failed in a machine. They used phrases like unlikely to regain full function and significant mobility impairment. They danced around the word never. They were careful not to steal my hope outright, but they certainly didn't hand me any either. As I lay there staring at beige tiles on a hospital ceiling in Maryland, a sickening thought clawed its way through the drug haze. It wasn't about walking. It wasn't about running. It wasn't about whether I'd ever dance at a wedding or hike a trail or feel sand between my toes again. The thought was, what are they going to say about the disability check? I felt a surge of bile in my throat. I was lying in a hospital bed with my spine held together by rods and screws, my career in ashes, and my first coherent panic was about my family's reaction to my income potential. I wondered if the disability payments would match my combat pay. I wondered how I'd explain to my father that I could no longer pick up extra hazard shifts because there were no more shifts to pick up. I wondered if my mother would be disappointed that the steady stream of cash transfers might dry up. I hated myself for thinking it. I hated them for planting that instinct so deep in my psyche that it survived a bomb blast. 2 weeks later, I was transferred to the Riverside Veteran Recovery Center. Riverside was a different kind of battlefield. It smelled of industrial antiseptic, cheap cafeteria coffee, and unwashed hair. The soundtrack was the squeak of rubber tires on linoleum and the grunt of exertion from people trying to relearn how to exist in bodies that no longer cooperated. It was a warehouse for broken toys, a place where the government tried to repair what it had shattered. My room was small. There was a window that looked out over a parking lot. My days were measured in inches of progress. I had to relearn everything. I had to learn how to drag my body from the bed to the wheelchair, a maneuver that required more upper body strength than a pull-up. I had to learn how to use a slide board without falling, how to navigate a bathroom that suddenly felt like an obstacle course designed specifically to humiliate me. I spent hours in the physical therapy gym sweating through my shirt, gritting my teeth until my jaw ached, trying to push a wheelchair up a small wooden ramp. My arms burned, my palms blistered and bled. Every time I failed, every time I rolled backward, I felt a flash of rage so hot it made me dizzy. One afternoon, a nurse named Marjorie found me in the hallway. I wasn't crying loudly. I was just sitting there, staring at the wall, tears leaking out of my eyes because I'd dropped my water bottle and couldn't reach it from the chair. Marjorie was a woman in her 60s with forearms like a dock worker and eyes that had seen every tragedy a war could produce. She picked up the bottle without a word and handed it to me. She didn't pat my head. She didn't say it would be okay or feed me some hollow inspirational quote. She looked at the phone sitting on my lap. It had remained silent for days. Then she looked at my face. "Honey," she said, her voice rough like sandpaper, "we can fix muscles easier than we can fix families." She knew. She'd seen it 1,000 times. The guys whose wives stopped visiting, the girls whose parents stopped calling when the glory faded and the caretaking began. She saw the truth I was trying to ignore. That night I made a decision. I needed to rip the bandage off. I needed to know where I stood. I wheeled myself over to the mirror on the wardrobe door and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back looked like a stranger. My hair had been chopped short to keep it out of the way of the surgical halo I'd worn for the first week after surgery. There were dark purple bruises under my eyes that looked like thumbprints pressed into my skin. My shoulders were still square, still broad from years of training, but below them, the wheelchair dominated the frame. I wasn't wearing my dress blues, I wasn't wearing my camis. I was wearing a gray t-shirt issued by the hospital, and a pair of sweatpants that hid the atrophy already beginning in my legs. No medals, no ribbons, just me, just the wreckage. I raised my phone and took the picture. It was raw, ugly. It was the truth. I opened the family group chat. It had been dormant since I'd stopped replying to loan requests 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks I'd spent fighting for my life in hospitals across 3 continents. I attached the photo. My thumb hovered over the send button. My heart hammered against my ribs harder than it had during any firefight. I typed a caption, trying to sound like the stoic soldier they expected. "Back stateside, rehab is going okay." I hit send. Then I waited. I sat in the dark, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. I wanted them to say something real. I wanted my mother to say, "Oh my God, Kinsley, we're so glad you're alive." I wanted my father to say, "We're proud of you, kid. Focus on getting better." I wanted my brother to ask if I needed anything, if there was anything he could do. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, then 20. The 3 dots appeared, bubbled, vanished. They were typing, deleting, talking to each other, coordinating their response. Finally, the phone buzzed. It was my father. "You better not expect us to take care of you. We don't have the space or the money to retrofit the house for a wheelchair." I stared at the words. They didn't make sense at first. My brain couldn't process the cruelty of them. I hadn't asked to come home. I hadn't asked for money or space or help. I'd just shown them I was alive. Before I could process it, another message popped up. This one from my mother. "You still have your savings, right? The military pays out for injuries like this." And then the final blow. My little brother, the boy whose truck I'd bought, whose debts I'd paid, whose rent I'd covered more times than I could count. Logan simply double-tapped our father's message. A little heart icon appeared next to the sentence about not taking care of me. He liked it. He liked the rejection. There was no, "How are you?" No, "I love you." No, "I'm sorry this happened." I sat there in the silence of the rehab center. The air conditioner hummed. A cart rattled down the hall somewhere. My phone screen dimmed and went black, but the words were burned into my retinas. I slowly lowered the phone to my lap. I expected to feel angry. I expected to want to throw the phone through the window or scream or break something. But I didn't feel rage. I felt a cold, heavy numbness settling into my chest, expanding outward until it met the silence in my legs. It was a new kind of paralysis. This wasn't nerve damage. This was clarity. For years, I'd convinced myself that their demands were just their way of leaning on me because I was the strong one. I thought I was the pillar holding up the roof. But looking at those messages, seeing the naked greed and the utter lack of empathy, I realized I wasn't a pillar. I was just a wallet. And now that the wallet was in a wheelchair, they were terrified it might stop opening. They looked at that photo of their broken daughter, and they didn't see pain. They saw a liability. They saw a spreadsheet with a negative balance. I whispered into the dark room, my voice cracking just a little. They don't love me. They never did. That was the moment I realized the blast didn't just happen in the desert. It had been waiting for me at home the whole time. The IED in Afghanistan took my legs, but the explosion on my phone screen just took my heart. And unlike my spine, I knew that damage was permanent. There would be no rehab for this. There would only be the long, cold work of cutting the dead weight loose. Driving the modified sedan felt less like operating a vehicle and more like piloting some strange ground-based aircraft. The hand controls were mounted to the steering column, a sleek array of levers that had replaced the pedals my feet could no longer reach, push forward to brake, pull down to accelerate. It was a binary language of motion that I'd spent the last 4 weeks mastering in the hospital parking lot under the watchful eye of an occupational therapist named Jerome, who never once made me feel pathetic for having to relearn something as basic as driving. Out here on the open highway, though, it felt alien. My hands, which used to hold rifles and pull squad mates out of burning trucks, were now the only things keeping me from veering into the drainage ditch. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles white. I'd left the Riverside Veteran Recovery Center at 10 in the morning. By noon, the landscape had shifted from the sterile, manicured suburbs of the medical district to the flat, gray expanse of rural Indiana. Driving back to Maple Ridge didn't feel like a homecoming. It felt like I was crossing a border into hostile territory. Only this time, I didn't have a briefing packet or an extraction plan or a team watching my six. The town appeared on the horizon like a smudge of dirt on a clean windshield. Nothing had changed. That was the first thing that hit me, the aggressive stagnation of it all. I passed the old Soco gas station where I used to buy slushies after track practice in high school. The sign was still missing the letter O, just like it had been 10 years ago. I passed billboards for divorce lawyers and injury attorneys, their colors faded by the sun to pastel shades of desperation. The barns were leaning precariously to the left, their red paint peeling away to reveal gray, rotted wood underneath. It was as if the entire town had been preserved in amber, but the amber was made of poverty and bad decisions. The only thing that had changed in this picture was me. I was returning as half the person I used to be, driving a car I couldn't simply step out of like a normal human being. I turned onto our street. The asphalt was cracked, the potholes filled with muddy water from a recent rain. I navigated the sedan carefully, my knuckles white on the steering knob. Then I saw the house, the Graham family home. I'd sent them $40,000 over the last 3 years, specifically earmarked for home repairs. I'd wired money for a new roof, for siding, for fixing the drainage in the yard so the basement wouldn't flood every spring. But as I pulled into the driveway, the house looked like it was rotting from the inside out. The shingles were patchy and curled like dead leaves. The gutters sagged, choked with debris, dragging the fascia board down with them. The front yard was a jungle of knee-high crabgrass and dandelion weeds that had gone to seed. And there, tucked under the windshield wiper of my father's Ford F-150, was a bright pink slip of paper. Even from the driveway, I knew what it was. A final notice, a collection attempt. I turned off the engine. The silence in the car was heavy, pressing down on my chest. I sat there for a moment, just staring at the house my money was supposed to be saving. It looked tired, defeated, like it had given up. I opened the driver's side door and began the process I'd practiced 100 times. Assemble the chair, lock the wheels, position the slide board, transfer my weight. It was a clumsy, undignified dance, but I did it. The whole maneuver took about 3 minutes. 3 minutes of grunting and sweating and praying I wouldn't fall flat on my face in the driveway for the neighbors to see. I slammed the car door shut and wheeled myself toward the front porch. I made it about halfway up the driveway before I noticed the pathway. The concrete had cracked and crumbled over the years, leaving uneven chunks and gaps filled with loose gravel that my family had apparently tossed down as a half-hearted repair attempt. Each push of the wheels sent jolts up through my arms as the chair bumped and jerked over the terrain. I had to stop twice to reposition, my shoulders burning from the effort of keeping the chair from tipping sideways into the grass. When I finally reached the porch, there was a wooden ramp leading up to the door. I stopped at the bottom of it, my hands gripping the push rims, and stared. I remembered building this ramp. I was 17 years old. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, had broken her hip and her insurance wouldn't pay for accessibility modifications. My father had said it wasn't our problem, but I'd borrowed lumber from a construction site where they were building new tract houses on the edge of town, and I'd spent an entire weekend measuring, cutting, and drilling until Mrs. Higgins could get her wheelchair inside her own front door. I touched the weathered handrail. I'd built this for an old woman because I wanted to be helpful. I never imagined that 15 years later, I'd be the one dragging myself up the incline, paralyzed by a war my neighbors only saw on the evening news. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. I pushed myself up. The wood creaked under the rubber tires. I reached the door and knocked. I didn't have a key anymore. I hadn't had a key to this house in years. It took 2 full minutes for the door to open. My mother, Dana Graham, stood there. She was wiping her hands on a stained dish towel, the same faded blue one she'd been using since I was a kid. She looked older than I remembered. Her face was drawn and pinch-mouthed, deep lines carved around her eyes and mouth, but her eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, eyes that scanned the world for threats and opportunities. She looked down at the wheelchair, then up at my face. There was no gasp, no tears, no dropping of the towel to rush forward and embrace the daughter who'd almost died. "Oh," she said. The word hung in the air, flat and cold. "You made it." She stepped back, holding the door open. Not to welcome me, but to get out of the way of the wheels. It was the same tone she used when the grocery delivery arrived earlier than expected. Mildly inconvenient, but manageable. "Hello, Mom," I said. My voice sounded rusty from disuse. She turned and walked back toward the kitchen without waiting for me to enter. I pushed myself over the threshold. The transition strip bumped against the front wheels, sending a jolt of dull pain up my back that made me grit my teeth. My father was in the living room, Robert Graham. He was sitting in his recliner, the same one he'd occupied for 20 years, watching a rerun of some fishing show. He didn't stand up. He didn't even look away from the screen immediately. "You could have called," he grunted, eyes still on the TV. I stopped the chair in the middle of the rug. The carpet smelled of stale cigarette smoke and wet dog. Though we didn't own a dog, the smell was just embedded. Years of neglect baked into the fibers. "I texted the group chat, Dad," I said carefully. "I told you I was being discharged today." He finally looked at me. His eyes drifted over the wheelchair with a look of distaste, as if I'd tracked mud into the house. "We didn't think you meant today," he said. "We haven't had time to clean up. It's rude to just show up without proper warning, Kinsley. We have lives too, you know." I stared at him. I'd been blown up. I'd spent months learning how to not soil myself, how to dress myself, how to exist in a body that no longer followed orders. I'd driven 3 hours using hand controls with my arms shaking from exhaustion. And my father was lecturing me on etiquette because I'd interrupted his fishing show. "I'm sorry my survival is an inconvenience," I said. The sarcasm flew right over his head. Before he could respond, there was a thumping sound on the stairs. My brother, Logan, came down from the second floor. He was holding a bowl of cereal, slurping milk as he walked. He stopped on the bottom step when he saw me. He was wearing my hoodie, my maroon high school track team hoodie with Graham embroidered on the back. I'd earned that hoodie by breaking the state record for the mile run. It was one of the few things I'd left in this house that actually meant something to me. And there was Logan, wearing it like it was his, like everything I'd ever owned was community property. Logan looked at me, then at the chair, then back at his cereal. "Didn't know you were coming," he said, his mouth full of soggy flakes. He walked past me, brushing against the wheel of my chair hard enough that I had to adjust my grip to keep from rolling backward. He flopped onto the sofa, picked up the remote, and turned the volume up on the TV. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask about the injury, didn't ask about rehab or Afghanistan or Miller or anything. I gripped the rims of my chair until my knuckles hurt. The urge to scream was building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. I needed to get away from them. I needed a moment to breathe before I said something I couldn't take back. "I'm going to my room," I said. I turned the chair around and headed down the hallway. The hallway was narrow, barely wide enough for the chair. I scraped my knuckles on the doorframe as I passed the bathroom, the impact tearing through the thin leather of my gloves and skinning my skin. I bit back a curse and kept going. I reached the door at the end of the hall, my room, the sanctuary I dreamed about when I was sleeping in dirt holes in Kandahar, the place I'd imagined coming home to. I reached up and turned the knob. The door swung open. I froze. My bed was gone. My desk was gone. My posters, my books, my trophies from track and field. Everything was gone. In their place was a weight bench, a set of free weights scattered across the floor, and a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. Logan's clothes were piled on the floor in the corner. His sneakers, at least 4 pairs, were lined up against the wall where my bookshelf used to be. They'd turned my room into Logan's personal gym. "We needed the space," my mother said from behind me. I hadn't heard her follow me down the hall. "Logan's been working really hard on his fitness. He needed somewhere to focus." I turned the chair around slowly. She was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, defensive. "Where are my things?" I asked. My voice was eerily calm. "We had a yard sale last spring," she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "We needed the money for bills. You weren't using any of it anyway. You've been gone for years, Kinsley." "Where am I supposed to sleep?" She sighed, like I was being difficult. "We set up the guest mat in the den. It's perfectly fine. You'll manage." The guest mat. A thin foam mat we used to put out when distant relatives visited for holidays. The kind of mat you wouldn't even use for camping. "You sold my things and gave Logan my room," I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "You're only here temporarily anyway, right? Until you figure things out?" Figure things out? Like I was a college kid crashing at home for the summer. Not a disabled veteran who'd just been medically discharged. I didn't say anything. I just wheeled past her back down the hallway. I found the den. The foam mat was there, thrown on the floor next to a stack of storage boxes. No pillow. No blanket. I parked the chair next to the mat and just sat there, staring at the wall. This was my homecoming. I didn't sleep that first night. How could I? The foam mat was about as comfortable as sleeping on cardboard. My back, still healing from the surgery, screamed in protest every time I shifted position. But worse than the physical discomfort was the sound. At around 3 in the morning, I heard voices, low, urgent, coming from the kitchen directly above the den. The old house had thin floors and terrible insulation. Sound carried. I recognized my father's voice first, then my mother's, then Logan's. I should have put in earbuds. I should have tried to tune it out. But something made me listen. Some instinct honed from years of intelligence work told me this was important. She's not going to just hand it over, my father was saying. She's different now. Harder. She feels guilty, my mother replied. Her voice had that calculating edge I recognized from childhood. She feels guilty for leaving us here, while she went off to play hero. We use that. We make her feel like she owes us. What if she says no? Logan asked. He sounded worried. What if she's actually serious about cutting us off? She won't, my father said confidently. She's too soft. She always has been. We just need to push the right buttons. Tell her the house is in foreclosure. Tell her the bank's coming after us. Make her think if she doesn't help, we'll be on the street. But the house isn't in foreclosure, Logan said. She doesn't know that, my mother said. She's been gone. She doesn't know what's real and what's not. We can tell her anything. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. We need her to sign this, my father said. The second mortgage paperwork. If we can get her name on it, we can pull another $60,000 out of the house. That'll cover the credit cards and give us breathing room. My stomach turned to ice. She's going to ask questions, my mother said. So we don't give her time to think, my father replied. We hit her with emotion. We cry if we have to. We tell her Logan's in trouble. We tell her I'm sick. Whatever works. What about the LLC? Logan asked. Already done, my father said. There was a sick pride in his voice. I used her social security number and set it up last month. We can apply for farm grants, business loans, all kinds of things. Her credit score is way better than ours. We'd be stupid not to use it. What if she finds out? Logan asked. She won't, my mother said firmly. And even if she does, what's she going to do? She's in a wheelchair. She's not exactly in a position to fight us. She needs us now more than we need her. They all laughed, quiet, cruel. The sound of it made my skin crawl. Just remember, my father said, his voice dropping lower. She just came back from a war zone. She was blown up. Her brain got rattled. If she starts making trouble, if she threatens to go to the cops or a lawyer, we tell people she's unstable. We say the PTSD is making her paranoid. Who are they going to believe? The loving parents trying to help their struggling daughter, or the brain-damaged soldier who's clearly not thinking straight? Silence. Then my mother spoke. Do we all agree? We move forward with the plan? Yeah, Logan said. Yes, my father said. Good, my mother replied. Tight. We'll sit her down tomorrow night. Family dinner. Make it feel normal. Then we bring out the paperwork. I lay there on that foam mat, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. They weren't just asking for help. They were planning to commit fraud. They'd already committed fraud. They'd used my identity to create a fake business. They were planning to manipulate me, gaslight me. And if that didn't work, they were going to discredit me. And they were doing it all while I was sleeping under their roof. I'd fought enemies in the desert. I'd stared down armed combatants. But this was different. This was my family. And they were treating me like an enemy to be neutralized. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there in the dark and began to plan. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. But this time, I had the element of surprise. They thought I was weak, broken, desperate. They had no idea what I was capable of. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my father's truck starting in the driveway. My entire body ached. The foam mat had provided zero support, and my back felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my lower spine. I dragged myself into the wheelchair, every movement sending fresh waves of pain radiating through my torso. I wheeled myself to the kitchen. My mother was there, making coffee. She didn't greet me, just poured herself a cup and sat down at the table with her phone. There's cereal in the cabinet, she said without looking up. I didn't respond. I poured myself coffee with hands that shook slightly from rage and exhaustion. Then I wheeled myself into the den where I'd left my bag. I pulled out my phone and made a call. The number connected after 2 rings. Harborview Lending, this is Marcus speaking. How can I help you? Marcus. I remembered him from the last time I'd called to verify a payment my parents claimed they'd made but hadn't. He was a loan officer, also a veteran. We'd talked briefly before and he'd been kind. Hi Marcus, this is Kinsley Graham. I need to ask you about some loan paperwork that might have my name on it. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Sure, Miss Graham. Let me pull up your file. Can you verify your social security number for me? I did. More typing. Then a long silence. Miss Graham, Marcus said carefully, I'm showing several accounts under your name and social. Some of these I don't think you're aware of. My pulse quickened. Tell me everything. He went through the list. A second mortgage application pending approval. A business line of credit opened 2 months ago under an LLC called Graham Agricultural Solutions. A truck loan. Another credit card. Did I sign any of these? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The signatures on file match what we have from your original documents, Marcus said. But, Miss Graham, I pulled the dates. The business credit line was opened while you were… He paused. According to the VA database we cross-reference for veteran clients, you were in a military hospital in Germany on the date this was signed. There it was, proof. Marcus, I said slowly, I didn't sign any of these. Someone forged my signature. Another pause. That's a serious allegation, Miss Graham. I know, and I'm going to need your help to prove it. I'll flag the file immediately, Marcus said. And Miss Graham, thank you for your service. I was Army. I've seen this before. Family members exploiting veterans. It's more common than people think. We'll figure this out. I thanked him and hung up. Then I made 2 more calls. One to the VA social worker I'd been assigned, a man named Eric who specialized in helping veterans transition home. The other to a legal aid organization that specifically helped veterans with financial exploitation cases. By noon, I had appointments set up. I had a plan forming. And I had something I hadn't felt in weeks. I had hope. When my father came home that evening, he was carrying a bucket of fried chicken. Family dinner, he announced. My mother set the table. Logan came downstairs wearing my hoodie again. We sat around the table. It was surreal, almost normal. My mother even put out the good plates, the ones we only use for holidays. We're glad you're home, Kinsley, my father said, his voice dripping with false warmth. We know things have been hard. Really hard, my mother echoed. She reached across the table like she was going to pat my hand but stopped short. I took a bite of chicken. Waited. We need to talk about some things, my father said. Financial things. The house is in trouble. Here we go, I thought. The bank is threatening foreclosure, my mother added, her voice cracking with practiced emotion. We're 2 months behind. We've been trying to manage, but it's been so hard without your help. Logan nodded solemnly, like he was actually contributing to this household. We found a solution, though, my father said. He pulled out a folder. Inside was a stack of paperwork. A second mortgage. It'll give us the cash we need to catch up, and then some. But we need you to co-sign. He slid the papers across the table toward me. I looked down at them, didn't touch them. We're family, my mother said. Family helps each other. You've always been so good about helping, my father added. We just need you to do this one more thing. I let the silence stretch, let them sweat. Then I spoke. I talked to Harborview Lending this morning. My father's face went very still. They told me about the LLC, the one opened in my name while I was in a hospital in Germany. They told me about the business credit line, the truck loan, all of it. My mother's face went pale. You forged my signature, I said. My voice was calm, cold. You committed fraud. Now, Kinsley, my father started, his voice taking on a warning tone. I also talked to a lawyer, I continued, and the VA. I've started the process of freezing my credit and filing a fraud report. Logan's eyes went wide. You can't do that. You'll ruin us. You ruined yourselves, I said. I pushed the wheelchair back from the table. I'm done. You're being dramatic, my mother snapped, her mask slipping. We're your family. You owe us, after everything we've done for you. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound was harsh and bitter. Everything you've done for me? You sold my belongings. You gave away my room. You didn't even ask if I was okay when I sent you a photo from the hospital. You only asked if I still had money. We raised you, my father said, his voice rising. We fed you. We kept a roof over your head. That's called being a parent, I said. That's the bare minimum. You don't get to hold that over my head for the rest of my life. I turned the wheelchair toward the door. Where are you going? My mother demanded. Anywhere but here, I said. I went to the den, grabbed my bag, and started shoving my few possessions into it. My father followed me. You walk out that door, you're not welcome back, he said. I can't walk, I said flatly. But I can roll, and I'm rolling out of here right now. I made my way down the hallway, through the living room, toward the front door. The bumpy gravel pathway was even worse going down. The chair jolted and jerked, my arms straining to keep control. When I reached my car, I threw my bag onto the passenger seat, then began the painstaking process of transferring myself into the driver's seat. It took longer than usual because my hands were shaking with adrenaline. I had to fold the wheelchair and wrestle it into the back seat. By the time I finally got the door closed and the engine started, I was sweating and my arms were trembling. But I'd done it. I'd gotten out. I drove to a budget motel on the edge of town and paid for a room with my debit card. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and cried for the first time since the bomb went off. The next few weeks were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings. Eric, my VA social worker, connected me with Monica Reyes, an attorney who worked with a nonprofit called Veterans Legal Advocacy Group. Monica was a force of nature. She was a former JAG officer who'd made it her mission to protect veterans from predatory family members and scammers. She sat across from me in a small office that smelled like old coffee and listened to everything. I told her about the forged signatures, the LLC, the years of financial manipulation. I gave her bank statements, loan documents, everything I had. This is crystal clear fraud, Monica said, shaking her head. Identity theft, wire fraud, bank fraud. We're talking multiple felonies. What are my options? I asked. Um, we can file a police report and press charges, she said, or we can negotiate. We freeze your credit, separate your finances completely, and force them to take responsibility for the debts they created. We can also sue them civilly for damages. What would you recommend? Monica looked at me carefully. What do you want, Kinsley? Do you want them in prison, or do you just want them out of your life? I thought about it. Prison felt like overkill. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted freedom. I want them to face consequences, I said. But I want to move on. I don't want to spend years in court. Then we negotiate, Monica said. We make them sign a confession of judgment. We make them sell the house to pay off the debts. We bar them from ever using your credit again. And we make it clear that if they violate any of these terms, we go to the police. I nodded. Let's do it. It took 3 weeks to arrange the meeting. It was held at the offices of Harborview Lending. Monica, Marcus, a bank lawyer, my parents, Logan, and me. My family looked shell-shocked when they walked in and saw the setup. This wasn't a casual chat. This was a legal proceeding. Monica laid it all out. She showed them the dates of the forged signatures, the medical records proving I was overseas or hospitalized when the documents were supposedly signed, the statements from the bank confirming they'd never verified my identity in person. My father tried to bluster. This is our daughter. We were just trying to help. You committed fraud, Monica said flatly. Multiple counts. You used her identity without consent. You opened credit lines in her name. You created a fake business. This isn't help. This is theft. My mother started crying. We're family. She wouldn't do this to us. You did it to yourselves, I said quietly. Monica slid a document across the table. Here are the terms. You sell the house. The proceeds go toward paying off every debt you created in Kinsley's name. You sign a confession of judgment that will be held in escrow. If you violate any of these terms, it gets filed and you face criminal prosecution. You agree to never contact Kinsley again unless she initiates it. And Logan, you're permanently barred from accessing her credit. Logan looked like he might be sick. We'll lose everything, my father said. You already lost everything, Monica replied. You lost your daughter's trust. This is just paperwork. They signed. All of them. They didn't have a choice. I watched them put pen to paper and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no angers, just a hollow sense of finality. When it was over, I wheeled out of that office and didn't look back. The house sold 3 months later. My parents moved into a small rental apartment on the other side of town. Logan got a job at a distribution warehouse. For the first time in his life, he had to work for a living. I moved into a subsidized veterans apartment complex with full ADA accessibility. I started taking online classes in cybersecurity. I found a support group for disabled veterans where I met people who actually understood what I'd been through. 1 year after I sent that text, telling them to remove my name from every loan, I got a job with a nonprofit that helps veterans identify and escape financial exploitation. I use my story to help others. I teach them how to set boundaries, how to recognize manipulation, how to protect themselves from the people who are supposed to love them. My phone still lights up sometimes with messages from extended family members, cousins, aunts, people who think I was too harsh, who think family should forgive. I don't respond. I learned the hard way that explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me is a waste of ammunition. I don't hate my family. I just don't need them. I chose me. That was my revenge. And every single day, I wake up in my own space, in my own bed, with my own name on the lease, and no one else's debt weighing me down. I survived a bomb. I survived a broken spine. And I survived the people who thought my love was something they could steal. I am Kinsley Graham. I am 32 years old, and my life belongs to me.